Hello and welcome to this special live stream hosted by Uno AI. This session will be all about security for AI. How can we ensure safe and compliant deployments? That seems to be the talk of the town. Everyone trying to figure it out. We're all struggling with it a little bit. So, to bring this session to life and also to relieve some of that struggle, some of that frustration of wanting to adopt things like I brought in the man with the goal to have every security practitioner operate as the same level as an expert. I have the CEO and co-founder Shashank Tavari.
Hi Ron, how are you doing?
Doing great. Always a pleasure to speak to you, especially on the stream, because I know I'm about to learn. So, let's go ahead and kick things right off. I know that you are building something special. I just mentioned operating at the level of an expert for cybersecurity practitioners. Let's spend maybe a second or so kind of describing what does that mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, like you said, it's always a pleasure, doing these sessions with you. It's fun. And I'm glad that the listeners find it helpful and useful. So, excited about that. And the same thing for today. Hopefully, everyone walks out of the session today taking something away, something actionable, something interesting. So a little bit about us, what we are trying to do at Uno, and that kind of relates to making sure that every cybersecurity professional can perform at the level of an expert. We have gone down very intentionally to building a very smart, intelligent co-pilot and autonomous platform. And the idea there is that we want to take away all the mundane, tedious, cumbersome things that keeps us busy as a group, as a profession, and then automate that away. Make that effective, efficient, highly accurate, so that the machine ends up doing that work, and therefore bridges the gap, and everybody else is then able to step up and perform at an expert level, and is able to focus on all the strategic and important things that they've been planning to do but unfortunately are never able to get to, because the tedious mundane is kind of keeping them busy. So that's essentially the goal here. Um, and we hope that we'll get there. We are seeing some great progress, but there's much work to be done there.
There surely is. So let's go ahead and kick things off. I wanted to start by speaking about enterprise AI, right? Because I think in the enterprise there was this fear last year when things like LLMs really came to the foreground. There was this fear, like, oh, can I really use something like this? And now we know that there's reasons why we should at least investigate things like LLMs and generative AI, but there's complexities. So, what have you seen, helping companies adopt AI for the current complexities of for the enterprise?
Yeah, it's a very pertinent and a very relevant topic in every boardroom, in every sort of operational group across the company, for that matter. I think it's a struggle. It's the classic struggle of wanting to adopt newer technology, because you obviously want to take advantage of it. I mean, there's a lot of power in this new technology. There's a lot of new things that gets unlocked. So there is excitement, which is good, which is great. But at the same time, there is definitely a lot of fear, and the fear is genuine, because there have been examples already of newer types of attacks, newer types of threats, newer types of sort of weaknesses, if you may, that is leading to then this becoming the new a weak link in the chain, right? And you already are trying to protect and make the enterprise more robust in terms of your security, in terms of resiliency, and the last thing you want is this new powerful tool that is supposedly here to help you actually ends up becoming your weakness, right? So that's the dichotomy, that's the kind of struggle that most enterprises are dealing with on a daily basis. And because the information is not in plenty, or for that matter the information is very one-sided most of the time, I think enterprises aren't able to necessarily put together an easy framework, a simple framework to kind of deal with it, right? There's still a lot of discovery, if you may, that's going on in this realm.
Right. So, got a question to that might kind of like bring all this together. There's organizations that are excited to adopt AI, but
Right.
then there's the fear behind, what comes with it. Maybe something like attack vectors or data leakage, like there's increased attack vectors or you have data leakage. What should organizations kind of be asking their vendors? I'm sure you're providing AI output. So, like, what are people asking you, and what are some of those things that are going to help people get more excited about moving forward with that adoption?
Yeah, it's a very interesting sort of point in history, if you may, when we get to these discussions around what should be asked. And the reason I say that is, with respect to enterprise software, for example, I think there is already a fair understanding of the attack vectors, or a decent understanding of what kinds of things could essentially cause uh, sort of undesirable outcomes, right? You may not know all of them, but at least you have an understanding of what to take care of, what to protect, how to approach it, what not to do. So at least there are some sort of practices, even if they aren't best practices. There is a framework that exists for companies to kind of apply, and then of course improve and get really expert at. When it comes to AI, I think like that itself is sort of undefined, or loosely defined. So what I've seen enterprises do is they're trying to do one of the two things. Either they're trying to use the existing frameworks that they used for assessing SaaS apps, or for assessing other enterprise platforms, and applying the same lens and saying, well, how does the new AI stack play out with respect to these security controls, or these kinds of security expectations, or privacy expectations. So that's one way that certainly questions are being asked. In another way, though, I think because the whole AI system, and especially the Gen AI stack, is a fair amount of black box, if you may, at play. There is a little bit of sort of hesitation, and even where do we start? What do we start looking at? Right? Like, what is it that we could go and ask a vendor to make sure that we have all our bases covered? So even answering that question sometimes is a struggle for many companies. Now, of course, as we have progressed over the last year or so, I think rapidly many of these consortiums, like the Cloud Security Alliance, the OWASP folks, and many others, have come out with their own best practices and guidelines. Right? Like OWASP now has a top 10 LLM
Hmm.
sort of list, right? Just like they had with web applications and the works, now they have one for LLM. So one could use a guideline like that as a starting point. Say, sure, let me go through at least and make sure that if I'm deploying an LLM, a large language model, I'm at least doing the basics by
Right.
going back and looking at that OWASP list, and at least I have something, a more, sort of reasonable checklist. So yes, companies are kind of going that way, and we are also being asked like that, right? Of doing vendor onboarding, vendor assessments, these kinds of questionnaires are beginning to pop up. Now, the other part that I must mention is that the responses to those questionnaires can
Hmm.
sometimes also be very much in the gray zone, because many vendors who are using these public related infrastructures or doing some other pieces may not even be fully aware of what is the threat out there, or what is it that they are bringing along with their stack. And so many times the answers are not black and white, are not very clear, but they're kind of in the gray zone, and that then opens yet another sort of can of worms, if you may, of who to rely on, what do we look at, right? Like, where do we start here? So yeah, it's a bit of a struggle today, for sure.
What I think is powerful about, opening up these conversations is it makes you think about your IP a lot differently. Organizations now feel as though their IP is very valuable because they saw OpenAI train things like ChatGPT, and then Claude started, Anthropic built Claude and started, crawling the web, and we got to see how powerful our IP is. So I definitely think that's a point of consideration that everybody should have, is having some type of checklist, working with someone like Uno, kind of getting a feel for what our AI provider is offering, and how you can apply your own policies and guidelines to that.
Absolutely. I want to add in another couple of bits to it. You make a super good point. I mean, so far when we looked at vendor risk as, or a platform risk, right, or a new software adoption risk, I think it was largely around, hey, is this piece of software either going to disrupt my system? So that's why one assessed and asked questions around availability and reliability and the works. Like, that was usually one set of questions, and the second one was, is this going to impose newer security threats? Does it have the checks and balances? And so therefore those vendors would be asked questions around that, right? Like, hey, do you have the scans in place? Have you done pen testing? Do you have appropriate amounts of authentication? And do you have the right kind of privileges? Those kinds of questions, right? So usually the questions were in two bundles, like the system reliability on one side, and security on the other, for the most part, right? Apart
Hmm.
from, of course, making sure that you can stay in business and continue to serve. But today, the reason I bring this up is you make a super important point. There are other orthogonal or topics that are not often discussed in vendor onboarding that are becoming front and center. For example, IP being one of them. It's like, hey, is my intelligence or IP or the core sort of crown jewels of my company, are they at
Mhm.
risk because of the software that I'm using, right? So like that's not a question anybody asked when they were buying, let's say, a SaaS accounting software in the past, or if they were trying to get a desktop CRM software, even before that. So through the last 2-3 decades, as software has become bigger and bigger, I don't think anybody is really worried as much about IP being a threat to IP, if you may, right? But that has become very real. And similarly, I would say I think there are other areas which one is thinking about, like ethical considerations. How much of liability are we taking on because of the system that's coming in, and various other factors. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's just bringing up newer dimensions, newer vectors that traditionally hasn't been considered, right, for vendor assessment, for from a risk assessment standpoint.
My small company has 6 employees, so I feel like for us to adopt AI, it's very straightforward. It's easy. But when you bring in the enterprise, things are a lot different. And I would imagine that there's kind of this big thought process that's going on for enterprise organizations is to use the smaller providers or not, right? So like there's things like OpenAI. OpenAI is relatively new organization when we think of things like Microsoft and Google. It's so young. Like they haven't really developed their policies to the same level, and they probably don't understand all of those edge cases. Where do you think? How do you think enterprises should be thinking when looking at things like OpenAI's ChatGPT and other smaller organizations for processing their data?
Yeah, there are multiple like I mentioned, newer criteria, if you may, that have become relevant. So before I get into what enterprises are asking for, and we certainly engage a lot with enterprises, so we have a lot of first hand experience of how they're viewing that world. I think there's an important point that you made, an important statement that you kind of brought out, saying, hey, you're a 6-person team. And, so then it's a no brainer that you should definitely take advantage of the new technology and you can jump on it, right? And I can totally associate with it, because every, I would say, SMB and even mid-sized company that is agile and that is young and that is not, encumbered by various, let's say, regulatory requirements, or a complex business behind it, certainly benefits from taking advantage of this technology. And they are, in some sense, today kind of an extension of what's available as a consumer, right?
Hmm.
So, like whatever is available to you as an individual, as a consumer, kind of becomes available to small businesses and mid-sized businesses, because it's the same sort of expectation or similar set of sort of controls and similar set of caution, right? So I think like that is a no-brainer, and I think that every business is already doing it, and the ones who are not doing it will eventually be compelled to do it, because otherwise they'll probably go out of business. So I think like that definitely is happening now. In the enterprise level, though, I feel the story is very, very, very different, like very far removed from that. And I think one of the points that you mentioned is, of course, because it's new. I think the way I like to rephrase what you're saying is it's the newness of stuff, smaller companies, newer companies, technology and company with not a ton of history. So that certainly, I think, is something that large enterprises don't like to generally jump onto. They like to take and adopt a technology once it matures a little bit. And we saw that with the cloud, and we saw that with mobile, and we saw that with everything else, right, prior to that. Now, this time, though, I think that, and this is where the confusion or dichotomy starts, is that right from the C-suite to all the leaders in larger enterprises, there is definitely a desire to go adopt this technology. And the reason that there is a desire to adopt this technology is because this technology is unlocking some completely new type of capabilities, right? And it's trying to unleash this new power that, if large companies kind of don't become part of this revolution or part of this movement, they almost feel like we'll be left behind. And not only be left behind, but it would become a competitive sort of disadvantage, if you may, right?
Right.
Because the one nimble ones would go ahead of us. And then, of course, we would be just spending more money and time and energy and not taking the benefits of this new age. So certainly they have that desire, which is why they are even considering this, right? Because in a traditional sense, they may have not even considered it. They would have just waited out a few years. Say, hey, let's wait for 3 years, like it happened with cloud. Let other people use it, and then we will sort of nibble on it. So then, in the situation where they want to get into it sooner, and then they want to start sort of working off that, the big confusion that comes in, well, how do we measure the stability, reliability, security, and everything else that is important to us, right, from a protection and from a control standpoint of this new technology, right? So that's basically the question that gets framed in the minds of these enterprise buyers and enterprise decision makers. And then I think it's not an easy answer, because from an enterprise standpoint, there is obviously a desire to have a fair amount of control. And when I say a fair amount of control, is like fair amount of control, obviously in terms of security, but also in terms of, hey, where is the data going? How are you storing it? Can anybody else touch it? What about the privacy and other things that I have sort of sworn to abide by? Is that still maintained when this data enters your system? What about all the access control that we need to have in place, because we don't want unauthorized personnel to look at some parts of the data? What about the guarantee, or the legal liability that we sign up for explicitly, implicitly, as we provide our services? Does that get still maintained, right, with this new AI powered or AI driven system? So I think like those kinds of questions definitely become front and center for these enterprises, and the enterprises are struggling a little bit around that, in terms of how to approach it, right, and how to work with this new technology, and what does that mean, and how does it manifest? So
You know what I always think back to is what I got right here. It's just paper. We struggled and fought for so long to stay on paper. I remember when I was first starting my career, there was
right.
like these big long arguments about should we go digital or should we just keep this on the written archive? And to me, looking back, going digital just made so much sense. And I think we're at that same turning point for AI. Should we democratize, where our data is being stored and allow more people to process it? Or should we try to, process everything ourselves? I think maybe both, but I'm leaning towards long term future looking. You got to start investing somewhere. I think that from looking back at my career, financial institutions did a pretty good job from like my perspective of working with them, adopting newer technology. Some of the financial technology companies that I worked with, they adopted the cloud faster. They started to adopt using JavaScript libraries instead of trying to build their own libraries. So I thought that that was pretty cool. And I know where we stood in the digital versus analog era, and also where we stand in AI or not, is there's two coins. There's AI is reliable, and then there's AI is unreliable. The crazy part of right now is both of them are true. So how does an enterprise operate knowing that AI is reliable and unreliable?
Yeah. So, firstly, I have to agree with what you were saying. I think that a lot of enterprises were very hesitant originally to go online, and I think the digital transformation is for real. And many industries, especially like fintech, as you mentioned, right, like finance, banking, fintech, that has benefited immensely with this digital revolution. In fact, many
Hmm.
of them have become branchless organizations, or even if they have branches, they are more by exception. Most people do all their transactions online, and all kinds of transactions have been digitized. So certainly I think that's going to happen to AI sooner or later. But I think you made a good point here, which is a slightly um, a different point, if you may, from just purely being fearful of new, right? So there is, of course, the fear of anything new that exists, right, at large. And I think that is prevalent across large organizations, primarily because they worry that adopting this new method, new procedure, new technology, new style might actually disrupt the reasons for their success, right? Like the large enterprises have a large customer base. Essentially, there is a reason why they are large. I'm saying they have a large customer base, they have a very large business. They have a lot of different parties that work with them on both sides of the puzzle, both in terms of their sort of vendors on one side and customers on the other, and they don't want to disrupt it, right? So there's essentially a desire to keep status quo, if you may, right,
Hmm.
at some levels, because it's working, right? It's a very large, humongous system that seems to be kind of smoothly sort of working day in day out, right? Like getting the transactions going, providing the services. Everything is sort of like a well-oiled machine. There's like a supply chain behind it, if you may. that is resilient. So now, of course, there is the fear of new at large, right? Like, hey, you bring in anything new, is this going to go disrupt that, right? So that part definitely remains true here as well. But that's just part of the puzzle, because usually the fear of new can be surmounted the moment you get familiar with the new, right? So if there's anything new, the moment you dig into it, you study it, you understand it, you measure it, you figure out what the pros and cons are, what the risks are, then I think it becomes amenable, and you start adopting the new, whatever that new is, new process, new style. And one could argue that about everything, right? For example, digitization as a new technology, hybrid working or remote as a new process, so on and so forth, right? Like all of these kind of, you grow into it. However, I think with AI, there is another dimension that I think we haven't encountered yet at all. And that dimension is, AI is going to be making decisions like humans do. I think so far, if you look at it, a lot of the systems we have used, a lot of the processes, workflows, or whatever else, they kind of work, uh, side by side, certainly, but they kind of like subservient, if you may, if I were to use that word sort of leniently, to the humans. The humans kind of drive it at every juncture.
Oh
The
yeah.
humans trigger it, the humans stop it, right? But the humans kind of are driving it completely. The moment you start looking at AI systems, I think they become more of your peers to an extent. And I think if you don't use them as your peers, well, then you're not taking the advantage of the AI system. So that's the kind of confusion there, right? Or the dichotomy there, the choice there. But let's say they become your peers. An AI system, let's say an Uno autonomous agent becomes adds to your security or GRC team. Well, now effectively, in a way, from a mental model standpoint, you have another team member, right? And so think of it this way: today, you rely on your team member because you expect your team member to make good judgment, to come with a certain level of expertise, to be diligent about what they do, and to be honest, and be a good team player, right? Like these are sort of given, and that's why you don't doubt the output from what they produce, right? Or you don't worry about whether what they're saying hasn't been thought through well, or is based on some unreliable information, because that's kind of being not one of being a good team player, right? Of being a good corporate citizen. So sort of
I feel like
now,
you're about to open a can of worms with that statement.
I tell you, right? Right. So that's what it is. Now AI is your corporate citizen. So I think like that's the big challenge there, right? And so it manifests, of course, today. We talk about it in more specific terms. If you ask anybody out there in the enterprise or otherwise, conversations around hallucinations, for example, come up,
Hmm.
right? Which in other words is nothing but the sort of made up things, right? Like these things don't exist, but the large language model, as an example, ends up saying things with confidence which are completely untrue, like have no basis, right? Um, but that's just one, I feel, part of the problem space. The part of the problem space is, can you, when that system becomes your peer, rely on that peer, right? So it
Hmm.
becomes almost like it is a non-human member of the team, and can that member of the team get the same level of call it respect, or the trust that you have with the humans, right? There is an implicit trust, if you may, when you work with humans, and I think like that's the challenge, honestly, at the end of the day. And so what would the system have to demonstrate, in other words, right? Or what would vendors who are creating those systems have to make sure the system demonstrates that that level of reliability and trust gets established, right? Like that's basically the question, in other words, right? And so if that gets established, if that's what enterprises see, then I think, yeah, the whole fear about this new thing coming in and disrupting, or the new piece coming in and imposing new liabilities, is going to become less of an issue, because now there would be proof points to say that yes, the new AI system does work well as a member of the team.
Right. So I wanted to put a flag in here for a second, because I wanted to respond to that, but I also wanted to let everyone that's tuning in live right now, let them know that this is live. So we are having this conversation. We would love to bring up any comments that you have or questions that you may have, especially for Shashank, as he's kind of trailblazing this new path for AI and cybersecurity. But also, let us know where you're joining from. I'm here in Austin, Texas. Shashank is joining from California. I can't wait to be there next week for the biggest conference of the year. So drop a comment, drop a heart. Also hit subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're watching the replay. We would still love for you to like, subscribe, and follow the Uno AI pages. So Shashank, I wanted to circle back for a second to the statement that you made about trusting the output of your team members. I think that that is a funny thing to bring up, because when you bring up that statement and then we talk about AI hallucination, we know that people get it wrong already, because we do trust our employees, we trust our team members, our contractors, but we still like to double check work because mistakes are bound to happen. And I think that's the case with AI. We see hallucinations, and then sometimes it thinks it knows, but it's really wrong. I don't know if that would be counted as a hallucination, because you are asking it to give you a response. And I think if, people have been getting upset when AI has been doing more boundaries on it, saying, oh, I don't want to tell you this because it might be dangerous. It might lead you to learn how to write an exploit. So I'm going to step away. But we want the AI to answer. The AI will give us an answer. Hopefully, like you're saying, it can converge to always being trustworthy. But as we're in that state today where I would say you could lean on an AI. Maybe you can't take the work and take the output of the work and use it as direct input for another place that requires more than like a API response.
Right.
What should we be leaning on from an enterprise perspective for these first few use cases for looking at adopting AI?
Yeah. So I think the first part is the human in the loop part that you kind of alluded to. We will see meaningful systems that leverage and are powered by AI continuing to have a human in the loop. I think like that's going to be there for a bit, and I think that should be there for a bit. This is analogous to your statement of we still like to review, right? Like the work from our team members, and you could think of it in the dimension of when you have junior team members or team members who are just starting out, you make the extra effort of making sure that you review the work more carefully, right? It goes to a little bit more of the sort of a process of you know making sure it meets the quality, it meets the expectations, and then you go through a feedback loop, right, of making sure that those newer younger colleagues ramp up right to the level that you expect them to perform at. So this is how organizations work today, and so I feel like AI systems in a way will make their way again in a similar fashion with human in the loop, and reinforcement loops, sort of making the AI system better and smarter as they continue to be used. So, which also, in other words, means that if you are the builder of an AI system like us at Uno, we have very deliberately made that as a part of the workflow. So we have not tried to just build a system that totally keeps the human out of the loop, but it's very much by design includes a human in the loop. Sure enough, the heavy lifting, the cumbersome work, all of that the system ends up doing, but there is the role of a reviewer, if you may, where a human comes in, steps in, and then accepts it or rejects it, or does further downstream action on what the AI system has built, right? So I think like that human in the loop puzzle is here to stay, and here to stay for a long time to come. Now, the time when it matures to a point where there is cognition of some form, right? And this is a piece that perhaps we'll pick up in our next event about generalized and specialized intelligence and reasoning versus information and all that fun stuff. But I think the question is, till the machine or till the engine is capable of reasoning it from first principles and able to get to the a level of sophistication there, I think that uh, taking away the human in the loop is actually going to be dangerous, right? And why is that going to be dangerous is because sometimes the AI system is going to recommend things or do things that could be catastrophic depending on what you want it to do, right? So, for example, let's just say the case of cyber or the case of a system maintenance, right? Like let's just assume that we pass that job over completely to an AI agent, and we let the AI agent or the AI platform do the work of remediation as well, right? Like let's just say that's the case. Now, without review, it is possible that in the cases where it makes incorrect judgment, and one of which could be just made up things, hallucinations, kind of driving the downstream activity, it might end up taking actions which may not be appropriate. For example, it could go and maybe disrupt your production system,
Hmm.
not with the intentions of going and disrupting a production system, but with the genuine misguided thought that they're going to go and actually fix something in that production system, right? And so you definitely don't want the AI to go rogue with its current levels of sophistication, right? You want to use it as an enabler, as a force multiplier, which in other words means, again, goes back to the same point of, you want to be, you as a human being want to be, the final point that is confirming, is saying, yeah, this is good to go, let's move on, right? This can be rolled out. So I think that's here to stay a little bit, and I think it will probably help us, adopt and get familiar with the technology. Now, another part that I just want to quickly mention on this, which I think is worth considering, is if you look at enterprise AI systems, there are a lot of enterprise tasks that don't necessarily lead to very catastrophic outcomes, or that have a super high risk. They still need to be done, right? For example, you have to read through a document and create a checklist out of it so you can run a risk assessment audit. Let's just say a task like that. Yes, it's important. Yes, if the output is misguided, it could lead to the team spending time on some element that may not be relevant, for sure, and it's a productivity loss, but it's not catastrophic. It's not something that is going to really stop things, or lead to adverse outcomes. So I do feel that I think there is a case to be made that in the enterprise world, or in the enterprise scenarios, there are certain types of use cases, there are certain types of tasks where AI can certainly step in, with, of course, caution, and of course the systems, like what we have done, we have put enough amounts of guardrails to make sure that the hallucination is contained immensely, and in most cases it's completely eradicated. um, the idea is that those kinds of things can definitely be gainfully deployed onto systems where it can become more of a productivity enhancer, right? Where it can end up doing this task of reading and categorizing and collecting and generating, that otherwise is done with the help of cobbled together spreadsheets, or manual labor, or outputs of one system being combined with outputs of another system, and then the human sort of in the loop making a judgment and pulling it together. So a lot of that can definitely be done, right? um,
Mhm.
yeah, so I feel like I think that's the reality there. You have to kind of not take it all as a complete 100% reliable system, but think of it as a force multiplier, as something that can really be by your side and help you accelerate.
I think that's why the term co-pilot is so in demand. It's so hot right now because that's how AI I think can help us in many cases without thinking too hard about it. Like bring me information. I know one of the use cases that we've spoken about in the past is GRC teams. That was one of the things that no one on the team was really trained to do because every organization is a little unique. Maybe someone has done it at a different job, but GRC is done differently each time. There's a lot of documents, there's a lot of historic information that you have to go through. I think, what you all are building and looking at just that data curation, asking that data the same set of questions or, a very easily understandable set of answers that it could provide, like getting the answers to GRC questions is time consuming. But I think once you are able to grab all the numbers and grab all the context, it's pretty simple after that point.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so I think, in a realm like GRC, and we're very excited to be playing in that realm. We do feel like I think what we have built is a very compelling proposition, and we see regulated entities like large banks and healthcare companies and others jump on it. They're certainly seeing the promise here. But the big, just general sort of value add, which would apply to other kinds of domains also, which is very data centric, document centric, process centric, workflow centric, is that the moment you start ingesting, curating data and start building like an intelligence plane, if you may, where the agent or the system or the co-pilot can start doing a lot of the tasks that humans are doing today, I think that is a big winner at large, right? And that is a big winner for enterprises because you compress time, you get, massive amounts of speed and scale advantage, but also in a way you kind of break those workflows. If you really think about it, workflows were built around humans, right? The whole idea of workflow, if you remember, was like, hey, human A would do a certain task, they would complete it, then it needs to go through step B, which a human B would do, and so on and so forth, right? So it was really a transitioning from person to person, task to task kind of a process that had led to the creation of workflows. And most of enterprise software and most of enterprise processes kind of manifest themselves like workflows of some form or the other, right? A customer onboarding workflow, whatever sale transaction workflow, a product sort of release workflow, so on and so forth,
Hmm.
right? And what we are seeing is that with the emergence of copilots, you'll see a lot of those pieces of the puzzle getting automated out and perhaps even being rendered completely useless in the new model, which means that we might see maybe even disruption of the workflow, right? Like they won't many types of workflows may not exist anymore or may not be needed anymore, in fact.
Yeah, I think that's what we're starting to see is, we as humans often have to do repetitive tasks. And I think that the tasks become more abstract as technology gets better. And now I think we're starting to see how many repetitive tasks that we were taking as humans, like opening up a specific sequence of applications, very, very repetitive, pulling down information about your assets or about your policies, repetitive and time consuming. So I definitely think that that definitely rings true for how everyone's looking at AI being that force multiplier. We've been speaking a lot about enterprise adoption, and we've spoken a little bit about how organizations could get better at adopting, but we haven't necessarily said what the current rate of adoption is and like where we the current stance is. Speaking to enterprise organizations, what are you seeing as where we're at and where things are going?
Yeah, this is a there's a little bit of a gap between hype and reality here when it comes to enterprises. And the reason is not so much that they aren't excited about the technology, but because of all the pieces that we have discussed so far, right? Security for AI, ethical considerations, possible IP related threats, things around reliability, right? And then of course the control. I think like these vectors certainly are questions that need to be answered for enterprises to jump in and go all in on AI. um, Now, what we have seen, at least this is our experience out there on the field, talking to a lot of big customers, larger global 2000 companies, public companies across some critical areas, for example, banking, fintech, insurance, healthcare, biotech, critical sector, industrial. And we speak to a lot of leaders in that space. I've probably on calls with C-suite execs from all of these companies almost every working day, and some days I have up to about 3-4 different calls with them, with each one of them. And we are doing a lot of POCs, and we are selling to that enterprise. Now, what we are seeing is that as we work with these customers, for a lot of these enterprise customers, these questions that I was just laying out is of paramount importance. So you can't push that through. The idea of, hey, here's a technology and somehow just adopt it overnight is not going to work for enterprises, and especially for larger distributed global enterprises, even more so. So now the question is, well, in order to get that, what can be done quickly so that it enables companies to go adopt AI at a more rapid pace? And so many of these companies today are spending massive amounts of energy setting together what you could call an AI governance framework. And this AI governance framework is really around these different vectors that I mentioned: security for AI, legal considerations, controls, and how do we do it? Even deployment topologies. Can we even bring that in within our own umbrella? Instead of using some sort of a public black box, can we control it ourselves? Can there be private deployments for us? What does it mean in terms of privacy? What does it mean in terms of retrofitting our previous generation applications and making them work with AI? And then, of course, last but not the least, what are the business ramifications of this? I mean, the advantages, of course, are very evident, and that is why there is excitement. But also, with every advantage, it comes with a certain cost, right? And cost is not so much in the cost of acquiring these AI systems, but the cost of, hey, I need to transition my data center if I'm going to run that privately. I have to go transition, retrain my workforce, maybe even cut down some on my workforce or repurpose them. And then also, what is the impact in terms of my end customer, right? Like there would be a transition period, and how would that play out? Is that going to take us through a period when the risk would be very high, and we'll have to have more eyes on it to make sure that we do not lose focus? So I think like there's all of this and more is kind of like the AI governance framework that many of these larger companies are sort of indulging in. Now, there are some who have made massive amounts of headway. There are companies that I know that have already gone ahead, put down their initial sort of, the AI governance constitution, if you may, for the lack of better word, internally, or guideline, that needs to be applied across enterprise apps. And now each business units and each leader can now jump in and start bringing on AI systems and take advantage of the power. But there are also in some cases where it's a bit of a struggle, right, where this AI governance has actually led to more questions rather than answers. Sometimes even existing questions that have not been answered for the last 10 years have popped back up, right? Like, hey, we don't even have a basic data governance policy, and now we're jumping into AI governance. Well, wait, let's first
Hmm.
clean up the house first, right, before we start getting ready for the next big party. So it's kind of like that, right? So I think that's the enterprise story. I do see a lot of traction there, though, in the sense that I think there is a lot of active desire, but it is certainly going to go through that motion before it becomes immensely widely adopted.
So I think it would only be right before wrapping up to speak a little bit more about Uno AI. Who's the target for a solution like yours, and what have you seen so far?
Yeah, so we are very focused on the enterprise. I mean, we sell to the enterprise. Our platform exists for the enterprise. So obviously, for us, all of these vectors become extremely important. Now, we are not a security for AI vendor. I just want to be very clear, right? Like, the security for AI and the robustness for AI and resiliency for AI and governance for AI is something that we take very seriously, because we want to make sure our customers are comfortable, and we act as the customer's voice as they start putting their governance together. And we've received that audience, and we like that, right? So we certainly very interested in the space. But I think the more important part for us is that our platform, which is a very critical platform, it's a co-pilot, it's an autonomous platform for the world of GRC, is actually a robust platform for the enterprises. So that a large enterprise, a large bank, a large healthcare company, a large public company, if they choose to go with Uno, which they're very excited about, many of them, they should not walk into that excitement with fear. We want to have them walk into this excitement with confidence. Now, the question is, how would they walk in with confidence? Well, they'll walk in with confidence when they see that we are, necessarily having open conversations and indulging in conversations around not only security for AI, which is, of course, a little more understood, but also looking at all the other considerations, right? Private deployments, which I think no other vendor today is talking about because it's complex, but we're able to do private deployments for them in either hybrid modes, or if they have the right GPUs or underlying pieces, we can go install in the data center. Looking at the IP and the workforce related and legal and other pieces, and therefore at least doing our part by making sure that we are able to contain hallucinations as much as possible. We are able to put checks and balances, and we are able to do citations. So, like, a lot of things that we do, we also kind of do explainability as much as possible. We say, hey, this is the system is doing this basis what it has learned, and here's the citation, here is what it has based its judgment on. So those kinds of things enterprises like, the explainability aspects, the security aspects, the governance aspects, and then of course the private enterprise AI aspects. And that's what I think makes enterprise AI. Honestly, I think that is enterprise AI as opposed to general purpose cloud AI, or public AI. So we can work in both modes, but yeah, that's very much by design. That's who we are.
That's what I'm talking about. I love that. So we're about to wrap up here. Wanted to give everyone a big thank you for checking out this live stream hosted by our friends Uno AI and Shashank. But I know that you have more streams, more webinars, more events coming up in general. So I wanted to give you a moment before wrapping up to let everybody know what they can expect next.
Yeah, we are very active online, and the reason we are very active online is because we get a lot of questions from the community at large, where they're interested both, of course, in our AI capabilities in terms of how AI can advance and make the life of GRC and cyber professionals better, but also the flip side of it, being early adopters, being deep in the world of building AI systems. A lot of questions come to us, asking us about, both from a development standpoint, but also from all the topics that we covered today, kind of enterprise readiness standpoint. So we like that. So given that our next webinar will be a month out, we try to do one every month, the first week, June 3rd. So, mark that on your calendar. We will do that session on artificial specialized intelligence. This is a topic that is of massive sort of conversations across all types of communities. Everyone's talking about AGI, ASI, real intelligence, super intelligence. Well, we'll touch upon it in a little bit of a depth in terms of what we have learned, what we have built so far, where it's going. Field your questions in advance if you have any. And then, of course, apart from that, we also do a whole bunch of other snippets and online events from time to time. So go follow our page on LinkedIn. I guess that's the best way to keep track of it. And as something pops up, you would know about the next upcoming event.
Yes. And if you don't know about it, you'll probably get an invite from either myself or Shashank. We would love to see you at the future events. And make sure that before you do anything next, that you go and follow Uno AI, whether it be on YouTube, LinkedIn, or your favorite social media platform. Shashank, on behalf of the Hacker Valley Media team, thank you for having me be your special co-host here. And also thank you to you as well for putting on this stream. And until next time, we will speak soon.
Thank you.